Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's edition of SIG Instrumentation. It is February 3rd, 2022. David Ashpole, kick us off.
Sure. So for announcements, today is the final day for KEP review. Get your KEPs merged. I just LGTM'd the kubelet tracing one, but maybe at the end, if we have time, we'll review additional KEPs.
Yay. Okay, I'll check the spreadsheet and have that ready.
Okay. Damien, did you want to talk about tooling?
Yeah, I wanted to bring a topic to this meeting because like recently I've been seeing more and more often like PRs that get merged without our approval, even though like they are changing metrics and whatsoever. And like whenever basically I'm finding like some weird metrics that I've been modified recently, every time when I go to the PR, it's been approved by like someone from the SIG team from this particular component. And kind of bothered me that we could have like give some insight to them like on how to improve that properly. And I was
have an
trying to
idea
figure
for
out like
this.
if we could bring some tooling or anything really to make sure that at least someone from SIG Instrumentation either says looks good to me or just approve the PR.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. So there's a couple of problems. One, the way that the labels work relies off of regular expression off of file names. That we can't really change. What we can change is we can add a static analysis tool and a hack verify script that ensures if a component-based metric is defined somewhere, that file name must be suffixed with _metrics.go. That is probably the easiest way to ensure the thing that you want.
Just one comment about that. What I've seen also so far is that the file was named properly, so the label SIG Instrumentation was present, but I guess it might have slipped like in between our triage sessions, so we kind of missed it, and to have approved before like we had a chance to really review it. So it was more like to really make sure that we are either reviewers or approvers on this particular file or PR.
To become approvers is a
I
bit
had an ID
challenging.
Yeah, the idea that I had was to basically ensure that all the metrics.go file are in their own directory where we have an owner file that is owned by SIG Instrumentation. So that I guess
I don't think that
is open will be the first assignees.
I don't think we should do that. I will tell you why.
That's outside the scope of our thing.
It's outside the scope of our SIG. Our job is not to maintain the metrics for the components. That's the responsibility of each component owner. Our job is to set standards. So like the reason that we have, I think Han wrote a special thing such that for like any metrics.go file, it gets a SIG Instrumentation label, and then we can review it during our reviews. Like we get, because the label gets on there, then we can get pinged as reviewers for those files, but we're not in the owner's files for those things because we don't want to be. And so like if those component owners aren't like requesting review and they're merging like metrics with issues, then that sounds to me like more of a social thing that we need to like talk to other groups and tell them to make sure they're pinging us when they want metrics reviewed or they're making metrics changes.
Alternatively, if you like, depending on how much this is bothering you, David, adding beta stability class to metric stability framework will solve a huge percentage of these problems, because there will be many metrics in beta, and those metrics in beta will have to generate the metric schema file in our directory, which we have to approve.
So that would fix the issue. So basically, like when the metric goes from alpha to beta, then we would have always to review it and approve it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, that would kind of solve the issue. Like the only thing is that is kind of still bothering me is that anyone can really like introduce their own metric with their with issues. I don't know, like a label that might cause cardinality explosion, and in that case, it becomes our problem and not theirs.
Oh, no, it is their problem. Like if, for example, there was like a CVE or something, like the owners of that component would be the people on the hook to fix it. But like for that reason, it's why we have things like the metrics cardinality proposal in order to like clamp these Kubernetes wise. We don't have to worry about somebody doing something like that. The problem
Yeah.
is we just haven't made much progress on it. So
No, that's implemented.
it's implemented, but it's an alpha.
Yeah,
It's still not graduated.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to do it this release.
So yeah, there's
But
stuff
yeah,
that we
that
can
sounds good to
do,
me,
but
like-
like in theory, someone should be like, I mean, the ideal in my mind would be someone should be able to add a metric, even a bad metric, to Kubernetes safely. And like we have provided sufficient tooling such that like we will catch them from shooting themselves in the foot too badly.
Yeah, definitely. And that's why recently, like I've been working with the people from Client Golang to introduce like a new mechanism that would help prevent cardinality explosion, but from the client side. That would be like kind of an opt-in flag to add to the registry, so that like any metric that has more than, I don't know, like 5,000 value for a particular dimension, we would just remove the dimension. So I'm working around that, but yeah, I guess like the thing that Hans said about reviewing all the metric that goes from alpha to beta is kind of good to me, I guess. Would be like a great improvement at least.
If you want to take up the beta stability work, I have this work in progress draft.
Yeah,
As a short-term
might take
fix,
it. I see.
should we just rename files with metrics in them so that
We can do that too.
we get, right, so that we
No,
get
no,
notified
but-
for more of the changes?
That doesn't solve the problem. There's a couple of problems. One is they're not always in the metrics file. The second problem is that like the triage accepted is once. So multiple SIGs getting tagged, which is always the case with SIG instrumentation. And if they have a triage, they're going to remove it from our queue.
True.
Well, no, but we look at things without assignees too, right? I mean, the issue, I guess, is that
They
what
may
if
also
have someone
assign
who's
someone,
not
yeah.
us.
This is what the like all instrumentation PRs is supposed to catch,
So
but we don't always
no,
spend a ton of time there.
maybe we should have a list of assignees, amend that query instead of triage accepted. Just do where assignees is not in this group of instrumentation reviewers.
That could work, yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, is that all for that topic?
Yeah.
Why don't we move on to, whoops. Jin Haas, are you here?
I'm Jin Haas. This is my topic.
Would you like to present or?
Yeah. I would like to
for-
presentation. I made some documents, so I would like to share my screen and explain it.
Give me 1 second to give you the ability to share. Go ahead.
Okay. Change your screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
I
it
was-
does say that this is confidential. So if there's anything we shouldn't be seeing, I just wanted to mention that since this is a recorded meeting.
Sorry. This is I can publish this document, so please don't mind.
Okay.
Left below.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just being extra safe.
Yeah, just don't want to get you in trouble.
Please don't mind this sign. Okay, I will start. I will share ideas. I'm currently thinking about that KP, so I would like to hear feedback on the concept of my idea. At first, I explained objective of this KP, this TB proposes to propagate trace context across components and across a series of related Kubernetes objects originating from a user request. And what I want to do is track logs. So this KP lays a foundation for enhancing relevant but scattered log with the trace ID as a common identifier. Next, I explain current our rough situation. Currently, we can trace in only Kube API server and etcd by using API server tracing feature, which is developed by David. And we can use trace ID for log tracking by using this feature. Specifically, we can acquire trace ID from trace context and adding trace ID into each log in Kube API server. And we can easily extract the API server log, which is caused by a request by filtering the API server log by trace ID. However, we can propagate trace context across each Kubernetes component, mainly control side. So I would like to solve this problem, but currently we can't complete design to solve it yet. The figure on the lower left is the range that can be traced now. Only API server and etcd and Kubernetes will be covered in the future, I think. And the figure on the lower right is a range of the log tracking that I want to achieve. To be precise, it means the range we want to trace the log. So not the range we want to propagate in the trace context. This is initial our idea. I and David thought that with the trace context to annotation in an object, so that we can propagate trace context to each controller. Specifically, since a reconcile function in controller has a key of the object to be reconciled as the argument, so it is possible to acquire the trace context of the annotation of the object from the key and propagate it in the reconcile function. To explain in the figure below, we store trace context in annotation. And then this can be referenced by using key. And most reconcile functions have a key as an argument, so we can use that key to get the trace context. However, I noticed that this method has a problem. In certain cases, we can't propagate correct trace context.
Well, multiple objects can actually actuate against the same object. So you might lose the trace context and get a different one. Right, like there are multiple controllers which act on the same objects.
Yeah.
So
I can
you
give a
may,
very, sorry, Han, do you want me to give a very boring example of that?
sure.
So a very boring example of multiple controllers acting on one object is on the pod, right? Like initially, you know, a client puts a pod into the API server, and then you will have the scheduler go and like potentially put a node on there. You might have an ingress controller go and put an IP on there. You might have, you know, any other number of controllers that might be touching that pod object, and then eventually like the node being maybe the most obvious thing will act on that pod object and actually go and do things with the workload.
So I'm not sure exactly like what this trace context will get you, since you don't know which trace context it is. You'll get like some random controller which last acted on it, which may not give you the story that you are looking for, right? Which is like,
yes, I think so.
So yes, this is the initial thing that we had in the API server tracing KEP as well. So this is the initial idea. I think they're going to describe.
oh, there's a different idea.
Found.
There's a different idea.
Right.
Okay,
So there's
okay,
going to be
sorry,
a different
sorry.
one later.
Sorry.
Okay.
Go ahead. Yeah, sorry.
This is problem our initial idea. We can propagate correct trace context if the following object types are different. Here I use two types, A and B. So regarding type A, I define object which triggers control action as A, and then I define object which is reconciled by controller as B. At this time, for example, user updates replica set object. In this case, type A is replica set. After this use action, deployment controller does reconcile action. In this case, type B is deployment. This situation means the deployment controller tries to revert the changes in the replica set. In this case, deployment controller gets deployment key in the argument of reconcile function, and then propagates trace context. However, this reconcile was triggered by replica set changing. So we should propagate trace context which contained in replica set, but we can't. This is explained in the figure below. When the user updates the replica set, a trace context is saved inside the replica set object, and which goes into delta file 4 inside of the informer, and then replica set object is passed to each handler. At this time, the replica set controller has not only the replica set handler, but also the deployment handler. And the deployment handler receives the replica set object, and then deployment handler searches for the deployment object that becomes the owner of the replica set object, and enqueue the owner's deployment object key to the deployment controller's work queue. And when starting the reconcile function of the deployment controller, what is obtained from the argument key of the function is the deployment object. So only the trace context of deployment can be obtained with the reconcile function. This is what I consider to be a problem. Next, I will explain the concept of the solution that I'm currently thinking about. And please note that this is different from the idea I recently told David. It outputs the required information to the log files in the same way, but uses different information. Main concept of the solution is using Kubernetes object UUID and its version in etcd. Current Kubernetes does not use object version, but it is stored in etcd. If we look directly inside etcd, we will see that each object has a version. And version means object version. And the object version is incremented by 1 as the object changes, such as updating specs or status update. For example, if the version of the deployment object is 2, and the contents of the object in etcd, such as spec and status, are updated, the version will be incremented to 3. This solution provides methods that track operations across Kubernetes components by tracking changes in the Kubernetes object version. So it doesn't use trace context and doesn't propagate it. So it's a completely different approach than the original idea.
Do you know what the difference is between the version and the generation?
So sorry, could you speak again?
Do you know what the difference is between the version and the generation?
Version is different from generation.
Yeah. But do you know what the difference is?
Yeah. In my understanding,
I don't know what the difference is, Han, so could you explain it to me?
No, I can't recall the difference, but I'm just wondering if one of them is more appropriate for this than the other, because I can't remember.
I have no idea.
Okay, so the generation is okay, from the docs, it says a sequence number representing the specific generation of the desired state.
Would it just exclude status updates
It
or
may.
something? That'd be a nice feature for this. I
Yeah,
think.
isn't that possibly better?
But I think we can maybe explore the general idea of using a version number for this.
Right, right.
in
I'm
Record
just
finish.
saying, yeah, yeah. So, sorry, go ahead. Yeah,
Ah,
sorry
okay.
to interrupt. I was just wondering.
And we can get user ID object version in etcd at the following timing. First, when API server receives the request, this means that we can get the version of the object that the request wants to change. And second, when the handler gets object and includes the object key into the work queue. This means we can get the version of the object which is passed to the handler, and we can also get version of the object to put in the work queue from the handler. And third, when starting reconcile, this means we can get the version of the object from the key of the reconcile function.
Oh, so you're talking about RV here. You're talking about resource version.
I think resource version.
You are talking about resource version here?
Yeah.
Okay, okay, cool.
Okay. For example, by outputting the following information to log files, I think we can track the processing flow. But this is still under consideration, but I'm considering we output information which triggered the request. Regarding Kubernetes API server, for example, in case of user output, for example, in case of user request, in this case, trigger is Kube control. And in case of request from controller, trigger is user ID and object version, which is acquired from the controller. And I also want to output turnet information. Turnet means that the object which is changed by the request. So for example, in case of user updates replica set, in this case, trigger is Kube control and turnet is replica set's user ID and object version. And then I want to output the information which is acquired in handler side. In case of handler, trigger is user ID and object version, which is passed into this handler. And turnet is user ID and object version, which is encoded into work queue. So in this case, if user changes replica set and then deployment controller starts reconciling, in this case, trigger is replica set, user ID and object version. And the turnet is deployment UID and object version.
Interesting. So you can make like a linked list between the object and the RV.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yes. Thanks. And this allows us to track the processing. That was a problem with page 4. I think this is problem. So I want to solve this problem and connect my idea. We output.
We're running out of time, but can I be frank with you? Like, I don't mean to, like, this is going to involve many SIGs. You're going to have to get buy-in from like basically every SIG. And right, because
Yeah, this touches API machinery, it touches apps,
Node.
it touches, it maybe touches Node. Definitely, it's under the scope of SIG instrumentation. There'll be a lot of people that we would have to convince is a good idea. Because we can't just go and do this on our own. We need all those people to agree.
This, like, if there's like a more incremental way to implement this, I think that would be your best bet. Like if you could target like one component where you could just do this and convince that SIG, hey, let's add this thing for debuggability. I feel like that has a higher probability of success than like presenting this entire solution to every single SIG. Like there's going to be some amount of information overload. It's interesting to me. I'm not sure. I'd have to think about this more because it's like, this is a lot, right? You guys have obviously put a lot of thought into this. But from a practical side, like you're going to run into some resistance from just the fact that there are like 5 SIGs that you're going to have to talk to, including probably SIG architecture, who you would have to convince if you wanted to do this, because yeah, this is like a cross SIG thing.
So what do next steps look like here, Han? Because the thing is, we're suggesting that we want to do this via log changes, right? We currently have a working group that's working on structured logging migration, and like that effort alone, like just transitioning to structured logs, that's taking an entire working group. We had another a proposal that came in this release for adding some contextual logging to some components where we could propagate like sort of automatically more key value pairs in the structured logs. But it's not touching any of the API machinery or adding any excuse me, annotations to any of the objects that are being acted upon. It's just using information that's already available in pre-existing contexts rather than the global logger. So it's a bit different than what's happening here. We sort of gave them, I was the approver on that, because it seemed limited scope and because there were like on-off switches. We did give them the sort of tentative go ahead, like cautious go ahead, it's approved, see how it works. For something like this, I would say we probably need a similar plan. You'd need a SIG that you have buy-in from that will approve changes to any logging code that you've made, and that will support your sort of POC.
Yeah, so you would have, I would say you'd have to go to API machinery and get them to sign off on this. And it should be a much slimmer version than this, because if you present these slides, I know the API, yeah, it would have to be a much simpler proposal for API machinery specifically. That's how I would go for it. And if you can get them to buy off on it, then like your chance of doing all of this increases tenfold. I have to go because I have another meeting.
Yeah, I think we all do. We really want to see you succeed. This is a very large scope proposal, so we're just trying to help you scope it down so that we have a hope of getting it landed, because in its current state, it will be very difficult to get all the necessary approvals.
How about people, if they have any comments on the proposal itself, and if you can link it, can we do that in the agenda doc? So
Yes,
please paste a link to, or somehow so that people can view it. And then if people have technical feedback on it, please leave that in the agenda doc as well.
Feel free to come to the next triage meeting. We can discuss it there if we have time. More.
Yeah.
Okay.
I will share this document.
Awesome. Yeah. Please, if you can, share a public copy of this presentation as well. That would be very helpful. Okay, I've got to end the meeting. Cheers, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.